right, welcome to another episode of Piecing It Together, the podcast where we take a look at a new movie and try to figure out what movies inspired it. But today on the show, it is one of our Breaking It Apart episodes where we flip the theme of our podcast and go backwards and instead look at a classic movie and what movies it inspired. And today we are talking about one of my favorite classic movies, King Kong from 1933, just celebrated its 78th anniversary. And I was really excited to do this episode last year before a certain little pandemic hit and screwed up everything. But it was actually the last movie I got to see in the theater before everything closed down. I saw it on March 15th, 2020, a special, anniversary screening of it. And it was incredible getting to see it in the theater on the big screen. By the time this comes out, hopefully I'll be fully vaccinated and planning my return to the theater for Godzilla Vs Kong. But if I never got to go to the theater ever again in an alternate hellscape future world, that would at least be a fitting end to the theatrical experience, getting to see King Kong in the theater. But I'm happy that it looks like I'll be back soon. So, joining me for this conversation about King Kong is Kris Krainock, who was supposed to do this episode with me back then, last March. But of course, that had to get put on hold, and I'm glad we're now finally able to do it. We had a really great conversation talking about a bunch of great movies, not just monster movies, but lots of other movies too that I think were inspired by King Kong. So that's coming up here in a second. Before we get to the conversation, I do want to remind you, as always, to make sure you're subscribed to Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts. You can rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or Podchaser. We've gotten a lot of really nice reviews lately over on Apple Podcasts. So if you enjoy what we do here on Piecing It Together, I would really love it if you leave us another review. I like to get feedback first of all, but also, supposedly it raises us up in the charts there, so that helps get the show heard by more people. So leave a review. 5 stars would be great, but just let us know what you think of what we're doing here. You could also follow us on social media at Piecing Pod and join our Facebook group, Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces. So, with all that said, let's jump into our conversation about King Kong. All right, so this is an episode we were supposed to do a year ago on the 77th anniversary of this film, but he is finally here to talk about it. Kris Krainock is here to talk about King Kong. Kris, how's it going, man?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
I just realized Kris Krainock, King Kong. I didn't think about that. And all the time we were supposed to do this.
I'm giant and hairy. So I feel like there's some connection there.
Meant to be.
Yeah, but the alliteration, right?
Yeah. I love it.
KK.
I love it. All right.
I feel like I'm the perfect guest for this.
You really are. You really are. Well, this is exciting. I mean, we've been waiting so long to do this. We were going to do this episode a couple of days after I saw it in the theater for that 77th anniversary, and then of course this whole thing happens, and that went on the back burner. But now we have a whole new reason to dive back into King Kong because, of course, Godzilla vs Kong coming out here any day now when this goes up.
One will fall.
One will fall.
Probably not. They'll probably team up and fight some other greater monster.
If one does, it will be back. So
yeah, that's the thing. I was like, that's pretty bold advertising.
Yeah.
I roll my eyes. One will fall. Will they?
Yeah.
Are they going to trip and then stand back up?
Well, all I know is I am so excited. I can't contain myself right now.
It looks pretty amazing. I'm pretty pumped.
I even like that rap rock song in the trailer.
Yeah, I don't dislike anything about it.
Oh, I can't wait.
Yeah.
But today we're going to talk about the 1933 original King Kong movie, which is definitely one of my favorite movies. I love King Kong, the character. I love this movie. How do you feel about the character, the movie, just before we start getting into things we think it influenced, which is obviously, as we talked about before we started, a ton of things.
Yeah, it's like everything.
Yeah, so many. But are you a big King Kong fan going into this?
Yeah, I am actually. It's one of those movies that it's kind of like a movie nerd movie. Yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of famous directors have always talked about it, but I watched it last night in preparation for this because I haven't seen it in a while. But in my life, I've probably seen it, like 20 times.
Yeah.
But watched it last night, and what always strikes me every time is like just how good of a story it is. Like, what a unique angle this crazy film director. It's kind of meta, which is interesting for the time period it was made, kind of
Yeah.
revolutionary in and of itself that it was kind of meta. But it's about this crazy film director that goes to this insane island and finds a giant gorilla and stuff. And so apparently it comes from a dream that the director originally had, and that's kind of how
Right.
where it started. And it has like this really weird dream logic about it. But it just is such a great it's like one of the iconic film stories.
Yeah.
So, I understand why it's such a big influence, just from its very inception, and then, of course, how influential it was in terms of its special effects. So, for me personally, yeah, I really love it
Yeah.
and appreciate it as, like, a pioneer.
Yeah, and as a pioneer, I think it actually might be the oldest movie we've covered here on Piecing It Together. I mean, maybe there's been some puzzle pieces that were older, but,
Mhm.
yeah, 1933 is going pretty damn far back as
Yeah,
far as
and it
movies
holds
go.
up really well in terms of, like, pacing.
Yeah?
You know, a lot of people complain. I'm a big like, I love old movies, and so I think I've developed a temperament, and an appreciation for the slower pace, but with King Kong really moves,
Yeah.
and, it feels more modern. I think it's one of the reasons why it's so enduring is that it just kind of, like, cooks,
Yeah.
and even though the Peter Jackson version added, like, 3.5 more hours to the
Right.
story,
Yeah.
or 2.5 at least, um the pace of the original was also something I really took notice of. I was like,
Yeah.
"Man, this is great."
That is actually funny. We actually just talked about it on our Justice League episode. I brought up, Peter Jackson's King Kong as a
Mhm.
puzzle piece for that because he took basically the exact same story and just somehow managed to stretch it out to double the length, you
Yeah.
know? And it's interesting that his movie is literally the same story. It's
Yeah.
just he added all this stuff to it.
Yeah, there's only one. I mean, I love we've talked about this off the podcast, is how much we love the Peter Jackson King
Yeah.
Kong,
Yeah.
which is like a fun movie to love because everyone hates it so
It's
much.
so weird how
I don't
people
they hate it.
Yeah, I don't
I don't
get
get
it.
it. I don't get it either. I think it's amazing.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing that the Peter Jackson one added was the kind of, mutual appreciation between the Anne character and King Kong, to
Sure.
where in the original, she's just kind of the scream queen, the very famous scream her head off type thing.
Yeah.
But in the updated version, they have that kind of understanding, and, that is a whole other emotional layer that I think is, like, the biggest addition.
Yeah.
Everything else is just kind of at a different pace and added more character development,
Yeah.
but that's really the only major structural difference.
Yeah,
That was kind
absolutely.
of interesting. I think it's interesting.
Love that movie. But let's start getting into some puzzle pieces here. And this, of course, is a breaking it apart episode. So we'll be talking instead of movies that inspired King Kong, which I'm sure there's some that we could talk about, but that's getting really far back.
Mhm.
So we're going to talk about movies that King Kong itself inspired. So what do you got for your first puzzle piece?
Well, I'm gonna begin at, like, my most basic one because I think there's an interesting story behind it,
Hmm.
which is that it's The Son of Kong,
Okay.
which is a sequel, which no one talks about, and
Yeah,
what's interesting about Son of Kong is that it was made within 9 months of the release of the original King Kong.
that's insane.
So King Kong was a huge hit. It was like the first blockbuster movie ever. It was, and that's another. I'll get to that later with another puzzle piece. But it was like the first big deal. Played at two of New York's biggest theaters at the same time. First film ever to do that.
Hmm.
It sold out all, even through the UK. I read some interesting factoid about how like 12,000 people were turned away from screenings in the UK. So it was like a worldwide phenomenon immediately.
Yeah,
And so they just capitalized on that. And they took a playbook from things that are now being done, 50 years
sure.
later, 70 years later, and they just reproduced it immediately. But what was interesting is that the filmmakers knew that they weren't going to like surpass the original. So they deliberately made it like tongue in cheek
Yeah,
and silly. And it is a far worse movie.
yeah,
And so, yeah, to have the kind of pioneering quality in such an epic film as the original, and then to have 9 months later written, shot, and released within 9 months.
right.
So if you look it up on IMDb, they're both 1933,
Yeah.
which is crazy when some sequences took several weeks to do with the stop motion animation.
That's especially the crazy part is the stop motion. I would have assumed that that would be like a really complicated process that would take a lot of money and a lot of
Mhm.
time, and they just must have had, like, a team
Yeah.
just that went, like, all in on that.
Yeah, they did, and
Yeah.
especially when they cared very little about the end product and the
Yeah.
quality.
Yeah.
They were like, "Let's
That
just get
too.
this out, baby."
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like a kind of a funny, uh, I don't wanna say comedy of errors or anything like that, but that's a little strong, but it's just a sillier kinda rehash,
Mhm.
and, yeah, Son of Kong. So I'll get back to a little bit more in some of my later puzzle pieces about what it went on to influence business wise. But this was like the first blockbuster, and then the first like Jaws 4,
Right,
of
right.
its time. So
Yeah.
there you go. So yeah.
I love it. I haven't seen Son of Kong since I was a kid. I was gonna rewatch it for this, but instead I rewatched the 1976 version.
Oh yeah.
Um,
So bad.
so terrible. But yeah, I'm looking forward to checking it out one of these days. I haven't seen it in forever. It sounds absolutely ridiculous, but I'm gonna go to another popular series that also has really bad entries in it. I think it's probably the most obvious possible puzzle piece for this conversation, and that is Kong's nemesis in the new movie, Godzilla.
Yeah.
The 1954 original, just, going to this very creative way to make this huge monster destroy shit and, like,
Yeah.
really, really kicking off this series so well. And also, in a similar way to how King Kong is, probably the best of its own series. I would say the Peter Jackson one equals it almost in a way,
Sure.
but a lot of the other smaller entries are terrible. I think the original Godzilla is so far beyond all of the other Godzilla movies I've seen.
Yeah.
I just think it's just an idea that it was just lightning in a bottle. It was like, well, let's do it with a giant lizard,
Yeah.
but let's make some commentary, some social commentary in there for a reason, and it just worked. It worked so perfectly in that first one, and there's a reason it's such a popular character, despite so many kind of cheesy sequels along the way that
Hmm.
don't really quite work as much. And that's just because it's a great character, and that's why it's going to be so much fun to see them fight. I know they did once before in a very
Yeah.
cheesy movie, but it's going to be awesome to see it in a huge Hollywood blockbuster style.
Oh yeah. I'm pretty pumped about it. What's kind of cool to me about Godzilla is that it's over 20 years later.
Yeah.
And so at that point, Kong had already been because King Kong was made pre-code,
Yeah.
which is why we get so many awesome death scenes and like the entire crew like getting thrown off a log and falling to their death.
Which
And
is why Peter Jackson probably loved it so
yeah,
much.
exactly. I mean, it's really kind of mind blowing.
Yeah.
There's even risque elements with the clothing and kind of sexualization that was, of course, cut later. So the film had already been re-released, King Kong, several times because it was
Yeah.
such an iconic movie so instantly that they recut it. They cut out all the violence and all the sex and all the innuendos and things like that, and they re-released it. So Kong was already like so in the public consciousness by the time that Godzilla came around. It's kind of amazing that Godzilla was like lightning striked or struck twice.
Yeah.
That there was a movie that went on to become almost equally as iconic and have such a thumbprint on a culture that where it comes from. I
Yeah.
mean, so yeah, it's kind of amazing that it did follow the formula of King Kong and yet somehow became this very singular movie in its own right.
Absolutely.
And it's kind of amazing, really, when you think about
It
it.
really is. We're lucky to have 2 characters that big, literally,
Yeah,
but big as movies and just awesome.
yeah, it's fun. I recently bought the Criterion collection where they put all of the Godzillas together,
Mm,
and I watched all of them. And there's a lot of value and fun and escapism in some of those really, really bad ones. And when
yeah,
you kind of get introduced to all the great characters that are now in that lore, like the other monsters, which I
sure.
think Godzilla's done really well, is in introduced all these other great characters as villains and
Yeah,
stuff like that. Um, but yeah, nothing really even comes close to that original.
yeah,
Not even close.
yeah, it's so true. Well, what do you got for your next piece?
So I will go with Jurassic Park
Nice.
as my other kind of obvious one. But the thing is, so these guys, like the Spielbergs and the George Lucases of the world, and even the Peter Jacksons of the world, these are the guys that are always like King Kong, King Kong, King Kong as like some of their favorites.
Yeah,
And I think what King Kong did that was so special, and one of the reasons why even like it kind of is cross-platform all movie nerds, it's not just like the action aficionados, the adventure picture people, but it's also like film historians and film critics, is yes, the kind of revolutionary aspect of its stop motion and its special effects work, which is significant, but it's also about the spectacle that escapist fantasy, that's kind of become synonymous with big budget filmmaking.
right.
And it's about, I mean, there was epics before. I mean, some of these silent films that were prior to King Kong really were massive scale, like films like Intolerance, were these huge epics, 4 hours long, thousands of cast members. So there
Yeah.
was kind of an epic quality to movies prior to King Kong, but King Kong had a spectacle about it.
Yeah.
And it kinda has such an absurd premise
Mhm.
that I think and, a film like Intolerance is very serious, and it's,
Right.
spanning human history and a lot of, intolerance of human beings, and so it's a very highbrow, high concept type movie, and then you have King Kong, which is basically a smash 'em up, but has this great soul to it,
Yeah.
and yeah, so it kind of I think it was like the explosion of good storytelling and, action and the very important spectacle.
Yeah.
And in my life, I'm in my 30s now, so when I was a kid, Jurassic Park it was everything. It
Oh
was
god, yeah.
such a big deal.
Yeah.
And that's a film that holds up to this day, in my opinion, because of its spectacle.
Yeah.
It really does still kinda wow you.
Yeah. Well, something you said previously there about it being like multiple things. I think that that's like a big part of what makes both of those movies stand out so much over just your general run of the mill blockbuster, which both of them have inspired so much.
Mhm.
But these movies, they are adventures, they're action, they're comedy, they're special effects, they're
Mhm.
they're everything all kind of rolled into one, which just makes it that much more exciting and that much more memorable.
Yeah, the thing is there's real storytelling in them.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest thing is that, you're invested in Dr. Grant and you're invested in the kids and you're invested in everybody in Jurassic Park. And you're really invested in the people of King Kong. I
Yeah.
think there's more development, ironically, in Son of Kong, where there's some of the characters get a little bit more backstory.
Mhm.
But really, you still are invested in the characters of the original Kong.
Yeah.
And that might just be because of the brilliance of the story and the ingenuity of the story of King Kong.
Yeah.
Kind of what I was talking about at first. I was just kind of marveling last night, like what a beautiful. It feels like it almost feels like a um what's the word? Like a fable
Uh-huh.
that comes from an earlier time that we kind of keep redoing.
Right, right.
But that Kong has is such a great premise that, it has that power,
Yeah.
and so I think that there's something, in the actual storytelling of both these movies, besides the spectacle, what we care.
Yeah.
And so many action movies now, I turn my brain on I can't even pay attention because
Yeah.
I care so little,
Right.
and so the only time I can even watch action now is when I'm invested in a story, unless
Mhm.
I'm going to Godzilla vs Kong, which I'm going only to watch them fight and smash stuff.
Yes.
If I'm going for that, then fine.
Yeah.
But if I'm not going for that, I'm watching the 900th fight scene of this
Mhm.
week.
Yeah.
I can't pay attention.
Yeah. And now we get, like, Marvel TV shows, so we get fight scenes week by week
Yeah, I have
it's
yet to watch the Falcon
I
snowman thing. I don't know
yeah.
what it is. I watched the other one though, and I
Yeah?
liked it.
Yeah, it's fun.
It was good.
Yeah.
I like Paul Bettany.
Yeah.
I watch him read the newspaper.
Yeah, he
So
is pretty damn
yeah.
good. I like him. Well, I'm gonna go with another puzzle piece here, and obviously Peter Jackson's King Kong is inspired by King Kong, but I'm gonna go with another Peter Jackson film,
Mm.
and that one is called Dead Alive,
Oh yeah.
one of his great splatter early movies. And in it, story-wise, this Sumerian rat monkey is taken from this island and stolen from the natives, and once it gets back to the mainlands, ends up causing all kinds of trouble. Of course, in this case, it's in the way that it bites somebody and turns them into a brain-eating zombie,
Yeah.
so it's a little different, but, basically, we get the same setup, though, for the way that things get kicked off, and, of course, Peter Jackson, big, huge King Kong fan, that's where the idea comes from.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. What a
Yeah.
great movie is Dead Alive.
So much fun.
It's one of those movies that, like, when you're young, you get. It was one of the movie for me, it was a movie that I saw over and over again at the video store,
Yeah.
and it had the cover with the chick with the mouth and,
One
like,
of
the
the all-time
skull
best
and the thing,
VHS
right,
covers.
right, best cover, and yeah, I'd always be like, "What is that? I want that, I wanna get that." So I finally got it, and I was like, "This is the best movie ever." So it's
Yeah.
one of those things where you show all your friends and, like, what a great movie
Yeah.
that is on its own.
Amazing.
I love that film.
So, what do you got next?
So I want to name a couple films because there's one thing in common, which is it's the work of the artist Ray Harryhausen,
Yeah.
who did Sinbad, Mighty Joe Young. That's the biggest influence, which is like
Sure.
kind of a cousin of the King Kong films. Clash of the Titans, 20 Million Miles to Earth. So this was an iconic stop motion animator from the 1950s that did most of the major, the special effects work we think back on of that period was going to be the Harryhausen stamp.
Yeah.
And so I think King Kong it's really sophisticated. Like I was watching last night, it was amazing to watch the dinosaurs fight Kong
Yeah.
and how kind of brilliant it was. Just the handcraft of that is insane. So to
So
have
good.
50 or 20 years later, pardon me, to have Harryhausen kind of define that subgenre of filmmaking and special effects, I could only imagine that King Kong blew his mind.
Oh,
And
yeah.
this set a whole tone for now a whole distinct era of cinema.
Yeah.
So King Kong is definitely the influence in that stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I love his work so much, and and King Kong. It's crazy, yeah, that it came so much before that because it is so. It just feels evolved. Like it feels like an art form that had already been being done for a long time. That the fact that it was that advanced at that point already
Mhm.
is very wild. I will say a dream movie of mine, a Ray Harryhausen biopic that is stop motion animated.
Oh, wow.
That's a movie
Just
I
hashtag
wanna
it.
I want that to happen
Yeah,
so
just
bad.
hashtag it, and then HBO Max will give you $70 million to do it.
You think they could do it for 70,000,000? I think so.
I think so.
Yeah.
They just need subscriptions.
Yes, that's
They're
right.
prostituting themselves for subscriptions. So hashtag it enough times, 3 times. I
Yeah.
think that'd get it done.
Let's do it, people. Piecing it together, listeners, get on it.
Release the Harryhausen stop motion film.
Cut.
That's the hashtag. Cut.
Alright, I'll go with another puzzle piece here. Um, I'm gonna go with Shadow of the Vampire
Ooh,
from 2000, a really awesome
that's a
movie.
great movie.
Yeah, I love it so much. Such a weird, like, great idea of a movie, but basically, taking F.W. Murnau and the idea that his Nosferatu was so realistic and so authentic, that its main star, Max Schreck, was actually a vampire,
Yeah.
and kind of dramatizing that into this movie where he really is, and he's played by Willem Dafoe, who's incredible in the role.
Mhm.
But here in King Kong, the reason why I have it as a possible influence is because of the Carl Denham character taking all of these actors into this dangerous situation to get the most authentic possible movie, that he could possibly make.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's kind of similar in a way to what Murnau was supposedly doing and really doing in the movie, supposedly in
Right.
real life.
The
But
great John Malkovich
yes,
doing it also.
John
Oh,
Malkovich, so good.
so good in that.
Yeah, but yeah, that's a movie I don't feel like enough people talk about. I love that movie.
Yeah, I feel like that's the kind of movie that's like due for a resurgence.
Yeah,
It's due for a reevaluation, and
yeah,
because it's such a gem.
yeah.
Because it's also very funny.
It
They
is.
knew what they had. They kind of had what an ingenious idea to
Mhm.
do that. Because the Max Schreck character is so haunting. I
Yeah,
mean, he really did feel like a Nosferatu. It was really,
yeah,
for the time period of the 20s. I mean, what a fantastic job.
yeah.
And yeah, very haunting. And then the Defoe version is just absolutely hilarious and fantastic.
I have to imagine that that is one of the, like, the best times Willem Dafoe has had making a movie.
Yeah, it had to be so fun.
Yeah,
It had to be so fun. And yeah, I mean, I didn't even think of that connection, but it's very much the connection that this mad director is subjecting his cast and crew to a
yeah,
real monster.
yeah.
That's really a fantastic piece.
Awesome.
That's really, and I yeah, watch that film if you haven't watched that movie.
Definitely. Well, what do you got next?
So I won't spend too much time on this, but I'm gonna have to say 2001: A Space Odyssey. Just really briefly.
Okay.
And I think the reason why I want to mention is, again, I think uh, the spectacle.
Sure.
I really do think that one of the things that makes that film so enduring is the larger than life stakes
Mhm.
and the spectacle of it. And I think King Kong had a really big ripple effect. Just kind of going back to that, it kind of touched all corners of the film world.
Yeah.
This kind of like weird, kind of highbrow, very avant-garde space epic.
Yeah.
I definitely feel there's a lineage because I think that it's the kind of film that inspired other filmmakers. There's something really unique about a movie that resonates with film people.
Yeah.
There's something about it that is some kind of like intrinsic quality about film.
Yeah.
And so I think that there was a sense of the grandeur is in 2001.
I could see that, and I would also put another comparison there with the idea of making this epic where you're not giving too many of the answers of what what is out there in this
Yeah.
particular world that this filmmaker is bringing to life, and uh, because that's not the important part necessarily. Like
Right.
you can think about Skull Island all you want and how all this happened and how did King Kong get so big and all this,
Right.
but really there's a story here that you have to come along for, and the rest of that is just part of it.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes logic gets in the way.
Hmm.
This is kind of a strange aside, but one thing that always crops up in my mind is that movie Us that
Yeah.
recently came out. I was really into that movie and I really loved the setup and I thought it was great. And I thought it did a great disservice to that film by explaining everything at the
Every
end.
single beat is
You know,
explained all the way.
and it's like, did we really need the specifics of why and how? And it's like, if you left that a mystery, that would, I think, entice us even more to think about it. I've hardly
Yeah.
thought about that movie since, except to bitch about it
Right.
because I was so disappointed that I was told everything. And when you deal with these concepts that are inherently absurd, like a gigantic gorilla that's in this, island that's left off maps, and that there's an indigenous people with a wall that he could just climb, but he
Yeah.
doesn't for some reason.
Right.
Um, when you deal with these things that are inherently silly, and I use that word kind of, it's people think that I mean it that it's flippant. Like, no, you can have really sophisticated ideas that are still at their core silly.
Right.
Um, and when you do, you really do them a disservice by trying to explain it because you'll never explain it well enough.
Yeah.
The problem is if you explain it, then our brains start going, we're looking for logic.
Mhm.
And when we don't find any, because at the very base of this idea is silliness, is
Yeah.
there is no logic, then we're like, oh, well, that doesn't all quite add up.
Yeah.
So don't make me want to put all the pieces together when the pieces themselves aren't going to fit.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I think 2001 was wise in leaving so much ambiguous.
Yeah.
It's not quite at its core silly as it is philosophical, but I think that trusting its audience and letting spectacle take over and letting you kind of get absorbed in that world is, I think, in a way, I know it sounds kind of crazy, but I think a direct lineage from King Kong. I think he probably saw that film in his young life and thought, well, this is something, this epic film is
Yeah.
something special.
I'm gonna go big with this one.
Yeah, because 2001, with the one thing about it is it's so big.
Yeah.
It always blows my mind about how epic it really feels.
Yeah.
I've watched big epics and they don't feel as epic as like a guy silently floating through space. There's just this massive quality about it that I think King Kong captures too.
Sure. Well, I'm gonna go with I said before we started this that I wasn't gonna do too many giant monster movies. I already did Godzilla, but I'm gonna go with another giant monster movie because I just really wanted to talk about it for a second, and that is Anaconda,
Oh,
which is I think
ugh,
when it comes to like just dumb, fun, big monster movies, a giant anaconda, and Ice Cube, and John Voight, and it's just it's so silly, it's so fun. Of course, they're making a film on their way in there. They're making a
yeah,
documentary,
they
so
are.
there's a connection there too. And also the crew just all being these like classic archetypes of this kind of adventure movie,
Yeah,
like and they all have their little moments, and I just think it's a perfect lineage to that, and then unfortunately from there, we start to, like, go downhill to a lot of the bad ones that
yeah.
happened over the last 20 years or so, but,
It's the best out of them though.
it's so much
It's
fun.
better than like Lake Placid. It's
Yep.
better than Deep Blue Sea. Like it's a
Mhm.
better, more fun movie.
I think so.
I agree completely.
I'm glad
Especially
you
with the
do.
documentary quality. That to me, that feels totally
Yeah.
direct. That's a direct reference.
Yeah.
Because it's like I was again, not to repeat myself, but kind of thinking about it last night. I was like, well, it's kind of a kind of a unique idea to have like a film crew, to
Mhm.
have this daredevil film director
Yeah.
that wants to like go because at that time, especially, so many films were made in studio.
Yeah.
So location shooting was next to impossible for just the practicalities of it. The equipment was too heavy, it was broken easily, it didn't do well in cold or in heat.
Yeah.
You had sound problems. I mean, it's amazing that this like idea almost reminds me of like a Werner Herzog
Yeah.
he always would talk about the voodoo of a location.
Yeah, yeah.
And how it's like if you put their actors in the jungle, then they actually feel it, and they're really frightened. So when
Yeah.
they perform, that's infused in it and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's That was one of the things that really struck me, and all I always think about is how interesting that is that they, like, chose that meta element.
Yeah. I was reading a little bit, about, like, the background of King Kong, the other day. I was reading this one article, and, apparently in 1932, when Cooper was first putting this thing together, and
Mhm.
even before when he was first coming up with the idea for the movie, I guess a lot of Americans hadn't even really seen gorillas yet at that point,
Wow.
so because there wasn't many opportunities to see them in
Yeah.
America, so it kinda had the, ability to go anywhere with it, with
Yeah.
like, this is what a gorilla is, this is what a gorilla can be, you know what I
Right.
mean? And I kind of felt the same way with Anaconda, like, are there snakes that big? Maybe, I don't know,
It's
you
possible.
know?
I'd buy it.
Yeah,
I watched, like, a clip from Conan O'Brien, like, 2 days ago, and they brought out a 25-foot python.
horrifying.
That is awful.
It would
That
swallow
is
you
the
whole,
yeah, the
Chris.
stuff of nightmares. Yeah, you could put, like, 3 of me in there.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I'm a tiny man. Yeah, it is really frightening.
So
That's
crazy.
interesting to think about it in those I knew what I heard really interested really quickly is that one mentioned earlier, it kinda came from a dream, but that the idea originally was just this image of Kong on the top of the Empire State Building fighting planes, and that they,
Yeah,
like, wrote the film backward from that image,
yeah,
which I
I
think is really great.
that there's that, and also he really wanted him to fight a Komodo dragon, but
Mhm.
then he saw something with dinosaurs, I forget what it is, but something that was being made with dinosaurs, and he just said, "Oh, maybe it's dinosaurs, then I guess we gotta make them real big." So, because how else would he fight a dinosaur?
How
Yeah,
else? Wow,
yeah,
that's
so that's
incredible.
kind of the,
The
dot to dot.
mythology of it, yeah.
Yeah.
What's interesting, I know that David O. Selznick, like, one of the great producers of all time,
Mhm.
the one of the greatest of all, of all producers in Hollywood history, left the project, but was the core, executive producer at one point, and actually was the one who gave the word "king" in front of Kong. At that point, it was just called Kong,
Yeah, I
and then
did see
David O.
that.
Selznick was like, "Call it King Kong," and then was it.
That he was
Then
right.
he bounced.
Well, what do you got for your next piece?
So this one's kind of interesting. This one's gonna be, the early French film, the, Cocteau's Beauty and the Beast.
Sure.
So King Kong had a really big influence in world cinema as well as American Hollywood cinema, which of course, we don't hear about often, but a lot of world cinema looked at Hollywood like a beacon. I mean, almost all of world cinema is typically a response to Hollywood because that
Yeah.
was the real major, kind of manufacturing center of cinema. And the French actually had a name for something, which it was l'amour fou, which means, pardon my butchering of that word, but it means mad love, like insane love.
Mhm.
And this was a concept that predated, King Kong, but when King Kong came out, they thought this was the greatest example of a mad love story. This is like
Mm.
a gorilla in love with a woman, and this totally insane, and she's terrified, and he's destroying things. Like, this is the epitome of insane love.
Yeah.
So it had a huge influence, and of course, the famous Beauty that's killed the Beast.
Yeah.
And, so when the surrealist masterpiece, the live action Beauty and the Beast came out, I think a lot of that relationship, the fear that turns into empathy and in some instances turns into love, I
Mhm.
think there was ground laid by King Kong.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. I think that, you know, pseudo love story that you've
Yeah,
got there, I mean, it's so iconic,
yeah,
and, of course, Beauty and the Beast is so iconic as well, just in its own different way from this.
yeah. But the thing is, falling in love with a big hairy creature
Mhm.
is pretty close.
Yeah, that's our lives.
Yeah, exactly. The women that love us
Yes,
love
that's
big
right.
hairy creatures.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna go with another piece, and really in general, because and again, this is goes back to the whole filmmaker aspect of the movie, but in general, I was thinking of found footage horror movies in general,
Mhm.
but I thought specifically go back to the Blair Witch Project as an
Alright.
example, but, going into this place that is just terrifying and you're putting everybody in danger, but you're gonna go because you have to get that shot. It's just this drive of the filmmaker,
Mhm.
and, that's something that, is through Shadow of the Vampire as well.
Right.
It's through, Anaconda even, but definitely I think in a lot of found footage movies, the central conceit tends to be let's go film this thing we heard about that's so scary.
Mhm.
No care about whether or not it's real, and no care about whether that thing is going to kill the shit out of everybody in your
Right.
crew, you know?
Yeah, it's kind of I mean, in many ways, it's about the obsession of the director.
Exactly.
And so obsession is a big theme of all those movies because that's really the only even if it's not done particularly well or intelligently,
Yeah.
I think that you're right, the general conceit that why we're believing this is because the person behind the camera is kind of unhinged.
Mhm.
That's a kind of a cliche and a trope that I think is it's acceptable. We just go, "Okay, this person has a camera, and they're still rolling during these horrible events.
Yeah.
It must mean that they're compelled."
Yeah.
And the kind of insane film directors is something that we've embraced, the
Yeah.
crazy, gotta get the shot person, and I think that really comes directly from King Kong.
Sure.
I can't think of maybe there is, but I can't think of an earlier example of a director that does that. I
Yeah.
know that he was inspired by DeMille, but in terms of, like, temperament and attitude, I don't really think about, the desire to have his crew killed.
Yeah.
It's like DeMille mixed with Herzog, basically.
Yeah, I love, it's through a lot of these puzzle pieces here, just this kind of meta element of, filmmakers being nuts and,
Yeah,
it's
which is
great.
so funny to me because I think it's a lot of bullshit because, I mean, so the thing is for me, this is a very small tangent, which is that a film director could be the most important person on a set, or they
Mhm.
could be the least important.
Right, right.
Because they could just wear their like baseball hat and a suit jacket and blue jeans and just sit in a chair and film crews will make a movie.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
They know how to make a movie. They don't even need the director, whatever. Unless the film is going to be good, then the director should be there to provide that vision. And, obviously that goes on, it needed to be said.
Right,
But there is this like notion that a director can be crazy.
right.
And that's nothing further from the truth because you just have so much responsibility.
Oh, there's so much to do for a
Like, you have to
director,
be a
yeah.
business person, you have to be a technical person, you have to be a crafts person, you have to be artistic, of course, make those creative decisions, but you also have to be a communicator,
A people
a
person.
people person.
Mhm.
So, like, this idea that, like, you wear a turtleneck and, like, stroke a white cat, like, and, like, just, like, space out, or that you're totally nuts is a romantic idea.
Right.
There's just too much, the
Yeah.
period. I mean, just too much responsibility, too much at risk.
Yeah.
I mean, I've only made films on small and medium scales, and there's still so much money and time at risk
Yeah.
that you really can't be like this aloof artistic genius quietly, stroking your goatee.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just doesn't exist. So I love that there is this romantic notion of the film director that we really all just embrace. It's
Yeah.
fun. It's
Yeah.
fun, and I
It
think
is, it's an entertaining character to watch.
yeah, and it does. It ripples through these found footage films. Like, I'll buy that some crazy kid has his camera on, even though there's like a lizard monster destroying the apartment complex next door.
Yeah.
Like, he's gonna keep rolling
Yeah.
because that's just baked into our brains that these people are nuts. Filmmakers are crazy. So I don't know.
I love that.
Kind of interesting.
Yeah. Well, what do you got next?
I'm gonna do Jaws,
Sure.
another Stevie film.
Oh, yeah.
He can wear an ascot and sit quietly in a corner. That's the only
Right.
director who can do it.
Mhm.
And he does often. And so to me, Jaws is kind of going back to what I mentioned earlier about how I think King Kong was a kind of a fever dream of the future of
Mhm.
how the industry would actually work, the King Kong and Son of Kong thing. Because I blame Jaws, and I use the word blame. I blame Jaws for like destroying cinema and then Star Wars coming and pissing on cinema's grave.
Okay.
In terms of roadshow distribution, right?
Yeah.
So how it used to work is film would be made, you'd take it around, and you'd put it in theaters, and it's a basic distribution model. And then the multiplex idea came around. Well, let's make merchandise and toys, and let's put the movie in every possible theater at
Yeah.
once, and that kind of thing. So that kind of destroyed roadshow distribution, which is the very seed of what's kind of destroyed the middle movie. It's now
Right.
the blockbuster or like the indie on like $5 type thing that we're dealing with.
Yeah.
So I use these words extremely harshly for comic effect. Obviously, I love Jaws because it's a great movie,
Right.
but it is evil also. So, so I think that idea of like this template having one, it has a big monster, right?
Mhm.
This is more grounded in reality. It has a big shark. It's a superb movie, right? It's a really great horror film, suspense film. But that has that in common. But it also was this let's repeat our success until it's laughable.
I was just gonna say, it's funny that like Godzilla, Kong, even Anaconda had direct-to-video sequels. Like all
Yeah.
these movies need to be repeated over and over again until they suck.
Well, yeah, because I mean, the basic concept of them is so repeatable,
Yeah.
and monster destroy stuff.
Mhm.
That's it. But the way that it's hurt film, and this is kind of interesting, the way if there really is this direct lineage between Kong and Jaws, the way that Kong has hurt cinema is that it kind of opened up the door to saying, well, let's use the same storyline this over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And in this instance, it's the direct sequels. So we have, by the time we get to like Jaws 4, it's like, Jaws has legs and it's on land or whatever. They get like really absurd and ridiculous by the time they're so bad that no one wants to watch them and then the franchise dies.
Yeah.
Now we're seeing it in other films. Like I just, not to talk too much shit, but I just watched Justice League and it's like basically Transformers and Avengers.
Yeah.
It's and it's not really the fault of Justice League. It's just that the last 20 years have been that.
Right.
It's essentially Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is just better at it. It's a better story. We care more about the characters.
Yeah.
But they all need a thing. They have a thing. They want a thing. Or they want to stop another thing from getting a thing.
Yeah. They have one thing. They need three.
They need three. They can't have the two come together.
Right.
Whatever.
Yeah.
So it's MacGuffin cinema.
Uh-huh.
And so in a way, it makes me kind of relax because at a movie as early as 1933, we've been sold the same story over and over again.
Yeah.
And there's not really a laboratory process to film. The risk is too high to lose so much money.
Yeah.
So that's why the Hollywood industry is not really conducive to true experimentation or art, is because it's too risky.
Yeah.
The overhead's too high. So I understand it. It's just a bummer.
Yeah.
And I think Jaws, because it basically changed distribution, it is the logical conclusion of what they tried with Son of Kong.
Mm-hmm.
They thought, oh, this is a way to actually change the model that we get films out.
Yeah.
And it couldn't have happened with a better film. I mean, Jaws really is great, all kidding aside.
Sure.
But it did have long-lasting, damaging effects on the actual industry.
Yeah. Well, I'll go on to another piece here. I'm going to go with Planet of the Apes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be in there. I mean, I honestly don't even have that much to say about it. I mean, I like some of them.
There's
don't
monkeys.
like some of them. There's monkeys. I mean, what more do you want from me? I guess you could also say wow them with the ending,
Well, yeah, go big.
Yeah, go big.
I love wow them in the ending. I always think about that when I'm writing my own material.
Yeah.
You could have flaws. You could have problems.
Yeah.
Wow them in the end.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
It's important. Wise words.
And it's true. The endings are so epic.
Yeah. Two of like the all-time like classics right there.
They're great.
Yeah.
I mean, the Kong on the Empire State Building might be the definitive like American film image.
I think that would be a fair thing to say for sure.
You could say it. You could make that argument.
Yeah.
And it's so great.
Yeah.
It really, again, that kind of comes back to that the epic nature of it.
Yeah.
It really feels epic.
All the more reason that the 1976 one is so bad because they screwed up the Kong on the top of a big building.
How do you screw that up? It's the one thing you got to land.
Yeah. And it looks terrible.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I appreciate the whole like updating of the industry to accommodate the time.
That's a cool idea.
The whole post-Vietnam thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it is weird also to think let's use King Kong as the vehicle to make a socially conscious film.
That's something they would do now, actually. But
Yeah.
it seems like a lot of big blockbusters have something under the surface like that.
Yeah, that's generous, saying that it has something under the surface.
Yeah.
On
the surface.
Yeah, there's sharing the surface,
Yeah,
I think is the best way to describe. There's nothing under these films.
That's true.
But no, that's funny.
Yeah.
And Planet of the Apes for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so good.
It's great.
I even like the new Planet of the Apes.
I love the very last one, War for the Planet.
It's like
so damn good.
That's when they fight the most, right?
There's a lot of fighting. It's also pretty much a silent film for like 90% of it.
That's right. Yeah.
It's just awesome.
Yeah, I'm gonna revisit those because I remember enjoying all of them.
Yeah,
including pouty James Franco.
Yeah, he was pretty good.
He's pretty pouty in that. Yeah.
All right. Well, what else do you got?
I'm gonna go with Cronenberg's The Fly.
Oh, sure.
Because I mean that's probably the most mainstream example of a Cronenberg. He's like his success story was the Fly with Gina Davis and Jeff Goldblum. And again, it's kind of a more psychological. It's considered kind of like a subgenre that he really kind of championed and is the king of, which is called body horror.
Yeah.
And it has a lot to do with like mutations and really graphic imagery and stuff. And The Fly is pretty intense visually and conceptually to be such a mainstream success. It really was.
Yeah.
He had made films like Dead Ringers prior to that, Videodrome, films that were extremely visually stunning, scanners and stuff, but nothing really hit home the way The Fly did.
Yeah.
And I think the idea again, kind of, I sound a little obsessed with this, but like the love story
Mm-hmm.
of loving these creatures,
Yeah.
because to me that's like one of the most special things about Kong, and why I love the 2005 version so much, the Peter Jackson version, is because they accentuate that, like we mentioned.
Yeah.
But there's something like in this seed of like these creatures that are really they're accidents. They're all victims.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
and like Kong is exploited and chained up and
Yeah.
stuff, and you feel for Kong, and he's like the least empathetic. Godzilla's like a mutant from nuclear testing, and so there's like a human element to creating this idea, and The Fly was an accident. The Fly flew into the chamber when he was like doing a scientific experiment, and he morphed
Yeah.
with it by accident. And he's just like really in love with her, and he wants to pass on his human seed. Like there's a lot of humanity in these stories,
Right.
and so I think The Fly is a great example of kind of going on the darker, weirder spectrum,
Yeah.
the grosser, dirtier spectrum. But what makes it work and appeal to us is like this humanity at the core of it, and that's something that Kong has inherently.
Yeah.
So The Fly is again kind of that love story, is it being a tether to the humanity of these monsters.
Yeah, no, interesting piece, and yeah, definitely, like you said, like, it's like a darker, weirder take on that kind of monster-human relationship,
Yeah.
but yeah, definitely, I could see that.
And I don't want to ruin a puzzle piece if it's yours, but one just popped up in my head: The Shape of Water.
Oh, yeah, sure, I did not have that on my list.
It's
Yeah.
like that one's one of the most overt, because she just like, I mean, Gina Davis on The Fly is like, "Don't touch me, freak," and there's still like a love and an empathy.
Yeah.
But in Shape of Water, she's just like, "I want to bone this guy."
Yes,
She's like
definitely.
cooking eggs, masturbating in the tub,
Yeah.
thinking about him.
Yeah.
So they just went. It was like that. Talk about a logical conclusion.
Yeah, they took it and ran
Shape
with
of
it.
Water was like, she's gonna not only love him, she's gonna fuck the shit out of him. And I was like, wow, okay.
Yeah, King Kong would have a little trouble with that, but,
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, yeah, it's not possible in Kong.
yes, I
But
think so.
yeah.
Well, I only have one more piece, and I'm gonna combine a couple things, actually, not movies, but video games. I was going to bring up 2 games that I thought were inspired by King Kong. First of all, of course, Rampage, which was made into a movie with The Rock.
The Rock.
Yeah, but these giant monsters scaling buildings in a city and trashing shit. I mean, Rampage
sure.
is one of the great arcade video games, and I love that movie. I'm one of the defenders of it.
Surprisingly fun.
It's so much fun. It's just dumb fun, but it delivers on the prospect of, let's see giant monsters smash buildings, and not a lot of video game movies do that.
Right.
The other one I wanted to bring up is Primal Rage, the fighting game with stop motion animated monsters fighting each other.
Oh, wow.
And that is like a perfect example of what makes King Kong so great, with all of the monsters fighting Kong the whole time, and especially with the stop motion technique being used to bring that game to life. It's just so similar in style as well.
Yeah, no, I forgot. I love Rampage. Who doesn't? But that
Yeah.
second one I totally forgot about.
Yeah.
Hearing those words, I was like, whoa. I
Yeah.
hadn't thought about that.
Primal Rage rules. It was always Mortal Kombat, which, by the way, that movie's
Ugh.
coming out too. Can't wait.
God, it looks so good.
Looks so damn good. If that's not the best video game movie of all time, it's a disappointment. Let's put it that way.
My expectations are too high. Knowing what I know about these types of movies,
Yeah.
I should be like, no, it's gonna suck,
no way
and
it's
then
gonna be
be
good.
pleasantly surprised. I expect it to be a masterpiece.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know what I'm
100%.
doing. Stop me.
We're sick. We're sick to our heads.
The trailer's so
It's
good.
the best trailer ever.
I've watched it 700 times.
It's so good. Oh man, yeah, but no, it was Mortal Kombat, it was Street Fighter, and then the kind of underneath that level was Primal Rage, and it ruled. It was such a great game.
Wow.
Well, that's my last piece. Do you have any other pieces?
I only have one more, and it's
Perfect.
super brief. It's just because then it's actually a great lead-in from talking about Shape of Water, which is Pacific Rim.
Sure.
So Pacific Rim, I haven't seen Pacific Rim in a long time. I don't
Yeah.
really remember virtually anything about it.
Mhm.
One of those movies I just stopped paying attention,
Yeah.
even though my eyeballs were looking at it. But Guillermo del Toro made the film, which is always, I understand that was like his cash grab that like
Mhm.
got him his Oscar. I think it's like he had to do a deal with the devil to
Right,
get his
right.
movie up at that, to play the political game of winning a Best Picture for Shape of
Right,
Water.
right.
So when I look at that, I'm like, okay, I see. That's your Cape Fear, Scorsese.
Yeah.
I get it. But so no, when I think back on what I vaguely remember about Pacific Rim, it's about big monsters fighting or
Mhm.
big robot people fighting monsters.
Sure.
And the only thing I really know is that Del Toro is probably deeply obsessed with King Kong.
Oh,
It's
God,
probably the
yeah.
film, like one of the films that changed his life. I'm just guessing,
Yeah.
but I feel like there's references in there.
Yeah.
I don't remember them,
Yeah.
but they're in there
Yeah.
for sure.
I wish I liked those movies more because I love the concept.
Oh my God, there's another one.
Yeah,
Those movies.
There's two of them. There's two of them.
Oh,
And
shit.
there's also anime and stuff like that.
Whoa.
But yeah, they went all in for the fans on that one. But
Also, fans. You're throwing big words at me here. I didn't know that there were fans.
I'm telling you, they're gonna write in. They're gonna have your head.
Release the third cut of the. I don't know.
There probably is one, but
Probably.
we'll get it.
It's the
eventually.
NC-17. It's actually Pacific Rim mixed with Mrs. Doubtfire.
Yeah.
That's release the Del Toro cut. I don't know.
Hollywood has completely lost its mind.
There's
at this
30
point.
Batmans at this point.
Yeah.
At the same time.
It's true.
I can't keep up. I don't want to keep up.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm an old curmudgeon, but it's all crap.
We're in a very strange time.
Yeah. I go on. I cut you off.
No. There's nothing more to say about Pacific Rim except for that. Yeah. I mean, come on. Del Toro loves seeing giant monsters. So
yeah, he must love King Kong.
Yeah.
I feel like that's going to be like, if you asked him, it'd be like a top 10er.
Come to think of it, Del Toro would be a great director, I think, for my theoretical Ray Harryhausen stop motion animated
Oh, yeah.
biopic.
I'm sure he has original dolls that they
yeah.
used in the films. Have you ever seen his house?
Oh, yeah.
It's insane.
Yeah.
It's like a collectible dreamland.
Oh, he would. Yeah, I want that movie now. That's the movie for his next Oscar.
Well, I'm
Give it
telling
to
you, I
him.
don't think HBO Max is in the green yet.
Well,
So a couple more hashtags and you're there, baby.
We're
That's how
getting it.
cinema's made now.
That's true.
Most filmmakers were afraid of like test audience
Mhm.
stuff. They didn't want like filmmaking by committee.
Yeah.
And now it's internet hashtag. That's how movies are made
You have
at
to
the
appeal
highest
to 'em.
possible level.
That's right. You gotta get with the times. Evolve. Okay, so our finished puzzle for King Kong included Son of Kong, Godzilla, of course, Dead Alive, Ray Harryhausen Films, Shadow of the Vampire, 2001: A Space Odyssey, Anaconda, Beauty and the Beast, The Blair Witch Project, Jaws, Planet of the Apes, The Fly, The Shape of Water, Primal Rage and Rampage, the video games, and Pacific Rim. So yeah, something that popped up early in our going through that conversation is the whole meta aspect of commenting on filmmaking. I think that's just like a big part of this whole discussion.
Yeah. I think that's why it has a special place in film people's hearts.
Yeah.
Because it kind of invented the director archetype, the kind of crazy madman director that will do anything for their vision.
Yeah.
And that's something that, I mean, all kidding aside, even with our kind of weird modern times, is that directors still fight for their vision.
Sure.
And so I think that kind of strikes some weird sentimental chord in film people, probably.
Yeah.
That there's a character that will sacrifice everything and does.
Yeah.
And it's tragic and epic and beautiful too.
Yeah.
There's some shots like when they're in the jungle in the original Kong that are so stunning.
Oh yeah.
They're visually beautiful.
Oh yeah.
The movie is really gorgeous.
It really is.
And the restorations have done a really great job.
Yeah.
They took all the stuff that was cut for the censors in like the 50s and stuff. They've put back in.
Mhm.
Apparently, there's like one scene that was lost, unfortunately, that they've never recovered from the original cut. There's all kinds of mythology about like the spiders and stuff that Peter Jackson went back in and put in
Sure.
again.
Yeah,
Apparently,
yeah.
there was something shot and cut, and that's gone too. But the film has been restored and looks really beautiful, and is like a 4K transfer now, and it's absolutely stunning. I watched it on HBO Max after I subscribed to get Justice League.
Yes.
I'm JK. I'm
Yeah.
kidding. And it looked stunning.
Yeah.
It looked really good.
Yeah. No, it looks absolutely beautiful. And Yeah, like I said, I mean, it being such an older film, it's crazy that the stop motion is just so advanced and like looks so good when these when he's fighting tyrannosauruses and stuff like that. It's like
Yeah.
I remember because I hadn't seen the movie in even though I loved it like as a kid, I hadn't
Mm.
seen it in many years when the Peter Jackson one came out, and I watched it like in the lead up to the Peter Jackson one, and because I was so excited for that movie, and I was like, I don't think he fights Tyrannosauruses in the original, does he? And sure enough, he
Yeah, he
fights
does.
Tyrannosauruses. It's like that they were able to do that
I
that
know.
far back is pretty damn wild, and it all just looks so good. Yeah, awesome movie.
Well, can I ask you one thing before you wrap up?
Yeah,
Because
sure,
this is our chance.
sure.
What connects with you about the 2005 Peter Jackson version? Why do you love it?
Well, I feel like it, to me, the biggest thing, and I agree with you what you said earlier about how it expounds upon that relationship,
Mhm.
between Andero and King Kong, which is great that we get more of that. But I also just think that it's some of the most exciting, fun, blockbuster moments that I've ever seen. That and Jurassic Park basically are the
Yeah,
best.
I think so too. I agree with that. Like, I remember watching, the Avengers Endgame, which I had my problems with, but the feeling in the theater
Mhm.
after, like, 10 years culmination and hearing the audience be that excited was such a amazing film experience for me.
Sure.
And then when I watched the film later at home, I didn't feel that. I don't think the actual film did that.
Right,
It was
right.
the audience doing it. So, and when I go back and watch Jurassic Park, I can watch that film anytime. I
Mhm.
love that movie. I mean, I could watch it at home and it still thrills me. And same with this new King Kong is that, yeah, there's a lot more humanity in it. And I love the Adrian Brody character,
Mhm.
much less misogynistic than the character in the original.
Yeah.
I was the line last night that really cracked me up. She was like, "You don't like women?" He's like, "No, I don't. But I love you." And I was like, "Holy shit!"
That's a line and a
There's like
half.
40 straight minutes of everyone bitching and moaning that this lady's on board. They're
Yeah.
like, "They can't go on boats." You don't like women? No, I don't. I
Yeah.
was blown away by that.
Yeah, there's a few
But
problematic elements of the time, but,
yeah, well, that's what it is. What it is. I don't want to erase it.
Yep.
But I was blown away. I was like, wow, this is hilarious. So there's a lot more obviously of an updated sensibility of the new film also. But besides the humanity of the Peter Jackson film, you're right, the spectacle,
Mhm.
it really delivers.
Yeah.
There's a plausibility. It's really tough with CGI, because sometimes CGI, when done really well or done sparingly, adds to your imagination, and then sometimes when it's like a big muddled mess of CGI, it really
Sure.
takes away from the reality of the experience.
Yeah.
And so I think they did practical effects work and CGI work really brilliantly in that 2005 Peter Jackson one.
Yeah.
And I really believed everything.
Yeah.
And so and I cared about the story. I was invested in the characters. And so those thrilling moments were 100 times more thrilling
Yeah.
because I cared about who fell off the log.
Yeah.
And that's something that, I hope more modern action people that are inspired by the original King Kong or inspired by Jurassic Park, they remember that we need to care who's on the log,
Yeah.
not just that there's someone falling off of it.
I think we should bring up one more thing before we wrap this up, and that is King Kong himself. I feel like he, as a character, is
Mhm.
just so you could connect with him so much, even though he's this giant monster,
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on that and and why that is like. Going into Godzilla vs Kong here in a few weeks, I know a lot of people are Team Kong, a lot of people are Team Godzilla. Going into
I'm Team Jacob.
yeah, sure.
Go.
Well, I can't I can't understand how anybody could not be Team Kong
Yeah.
because I mean he's King Kong. He's our guy,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you're Japanese, then you should be, Godzilla.
Yeah, I
But if
guess
you're American,
yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah, sure.
I'm kidding. No, no, you're right. I think, what's great about Kong as a character is he's curious
Mhm.
and he protects the characters. I
Yeah.
mean, in a lot of ways. And, again, it comes down to that romance in a way, that love story, that affection, that protector
Yeah.
quality, to where Godzilla saves people by accident. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? He fights other crazier monsters, but there's no real humanity in his character.
Exactly.
And with Kong, he's virtually a human character.
Yeah.
And because he's silent, because he can't speak, he can only roar. he has this kind of Chaplin-esque quality, which I
Yeah.
think that they also really do beautifully in Peter Jackson's film. They
Oh,
actually
yeah.
accentuate that kind of Chaplin-esque,
Definitely.
because she's like an acrobat or whatever, and she's way more talented than Fay Wray,
I love the moment when she's juggling
Yeah.
and he just, like, is totally bored by it.
Yeah, exactly. Or like even the ice rink
Yeah.
scene.
Great,
These are all very Chaplin-esque, innocent things. And I think to some people they might seem cheeseball, which might be part of the complaint about the film. But to me, that's harkening back to the essence of the success of Kong in the first place.
Sure.
Is that he has this kind of childlike, um, protective quality for Anne. So I think it's again just like it's his humanity.
Mhm.
I think he's fierce and, like, badass, like, he has all that going for him too,
Yeah.
and he's really scary, and, like,
Yeah.
but also too, I mean, we don't really know what Godzilla is. It's just like a lizard monster that has no real basis in reality.
Yeah.
To where we look at Kong and we can see a gorilla, can see a primate that's close to us in DNA, and
Sure.
so I think there's even some of those weird subliminal levels too, that it's
Yeah.
just a real thing we can wrap our minds around.
Right.
I think that the suspension of disbelief, which cinema does better than any other art form,
Mhm.
still has its limits.
Yeah.
I cared about Thanos because it looked like Josh Brolin,
Right.
and it had a gravity about that character. I was invested in that character.
Yeah.
So, and that's a big, ridiculous purple, grimace. But I still found myself involved in him because there was a sense of reality.
Yeah.
There was a sense of humanity to it. So, no matter what, even if people love escapism, they always kind of want to be reminded that they have one foot in something real.
Sure.
And I think Kong, from a monster, by far represents that the best.
I love it. It's a great place to end this. Kris, is there another movie you watched recently you'd like to recommend to our listeners, other than Justice League, the Zack Snyder cut?
Yeah, I mean, if you have time to watch the modern masterpiece
Mhm.
that is Transformers, Lord of the Rings, and Avengers, you should definitely watch Justice League. No, I real quick, my anecdote about that. I tried to watch it 4 days consecutively,
Uh-huh.
and I kept falling asleep. Just the Justice League, I mean.
Hmm.
I kept falling asleep after 10 minutes. And so HBO Max has on its logs that Kris Krainock watched Justice League like 5 full times. Because when I fell asleep, I would just let it play. It would just play
Mhm.
uninterrupted. They're like, this guy is committed.
Yeah.
Because in 5 days, he watched it 5 times in its entirety. And when in reality, I did not do that.
Doing the Lord's work, Kris.
I'm helping that sequel.
That's right.
That will explain even less and leave you wanting more somehow. I don't know.
We can't wait.
No. So what else? Promising Young Woman
Sure.
is an interesting one to check out. I Care a Lot
Mhm.
was another one, kind of similar in some ways. And Nomadland.
Oh, yeah. Great.
I think Nomadland might be like my
recommendations.
favorite of the year. But as
Yeah.
you asked me, I'm kind of behind. I'm ashamed of myself because I've been really, really busy, which is a good thing this year, making my own work.
Yeah.
But I've really not been I haven't caught up as much on the 2020 films as I should be.
Yeah.
So I'm not the guy to ask right now.
Well, Nomadland is excellent, and the others are good recommendations as well. So, yeah, I think that does it. Kris, why don't you tell people about some of that stuff you've been working on?
Okay, so last time I was here to plug my own film, Bizarro y Fantastico, and that is
Mhm.
still kind of not even really released yet. We kind of did like a release for family, friends, and colleagues and stuff, but it's doing the festival circuit. The festival circuit is super weird right now because of COVID, so
Sure.
most of the ones we want to hit are like shut down or they're only remote. So right now it's password protected, but if you want to see the film, I'd love you to see it. It's only kind of a loophole that we have to, or it's the password is kind of some contractual thing we had to do for the festivals.
Yeah.
But I can give you the password. So you can contact me. You can even reach out to David and he can put you in touch with me and you can see the film. If you think this guy is so full of shit, taking a shit on Justice League the entire time, why doesn't he make a movie? I made a movie and you can watch it. Then you can judge if I'm a piece of shit or not.
Mhm.
And then I'm making 2 films right now simultaneously, which is really insane. And I'm getting a play produced, but that's going to be in France. So a lot of your listeners might not be able to see it right away, but we're looking to get that out as well and try to get it performed, maybe even filmed. And so people will have access to the play. That's called The Imposter.
Mhm.
So there's all kinds of really crazy stuff happening right now. So Bizarro y Fantastico is out and ready to watch. You just got to get your password. And I got 2 new films coming out this year, hopefully, and the play, and that will be somewhat available sometime soon.
Well, I look forward to hearing about all those projects and look forward to getting you back on the show again.
I appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me in person.
Yeah. This is the first one in a while, so.
Thanks, dude.
Hey, I'm Josh Bell.
I'm Jason Harris. Hey, Josh, we're friends in real life, but we're also co-hosts on this new podcast called
Awesome Movie Year, where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies and do a deep dive looking at movies including the Best Picture winner, the biggest movie at the box office, future cult classics, and more.
Including the biggest flop. And this season, we're doing 1994. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. That could be Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or Spotify. We're all over the web as well at Awesome Movie Year on all the socials and awesomemovieyear.com. So please like us, subscribe, and if you do like us, give us a 5-star rating because we love you.
All right, so I hope you enjoyed that conversation about King Kong. If you like what we're doing here on the show, make sure to leave us a review over on Apple Podcast or Podchaser. Those 5-star reviews are awesome. We love them. We appreciate it. We thank you. Leave us some reviews. Also, make sure you're subscribed wherever it is you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to share the show with your friends, with your family, with your fellow movie lovers. We just want to keep getting this show heard by as many people as we can. So we thank you so much every time you do that. You could also follow us on social media at PiecingPod. And don't forget to join our Facebook group, Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces, where we continue the conversation about all the movies we talk about here on the show. We will, of course, have an episode on Godzilla vs. Kong coming to you soon. But I am just putting my paw down and refusing to watch this movie at home. Even though it's on HBO Max, I am not going to watch it that way. This is the biggest movie of our lifetime, and I'm going to see it in IMAX for the first time, no matter what. I get my vaccine April 4th. I'm not sure when this is going up yet, so I might already be vaccinated, but, you know, you got to wait the 2 weeks after that second vaccine. So April 18th, I'm going to see this movie, and then we will get this episode going. So look forward to that Godzilla vs. Kong episode, even though it's going to be a little late, but I'm not going to skip over it. It's going to happen. So look forward to that. And one other thing, don't forget about our Patreon, the Produced by David Rosen Patreon, where we post bonus content from Piecing It Together, as well as advanced episodes before they hit the main feed, and also bonus content from Awesome Movie Year, all the other podcast-related stuff I'm involved with, as well as my music career. I'm actually planning a single release right now that will come out soon as a single on Spotify and iTunes and all that stuff, but I will be posting it first on the Patreon. It might even be up by now, actually, now that I think about it. It's called Destined for Greatness, and that is going to be up real soon. But also, I've got a lot of other music-related stuff planned for the Patreon over the next couple of months, so keep an eye out for that. But check it out, patreon.com/bydavidrosen. If you really love what we're doing here and want to support the show, that is an amazing way to do it, and we really appreciate it. And the more people that subscribe, the more content we're going to make. I've got plans for all kinds of bonus content and special kinds of episodes that kind of play with the format a little bit. So we're going to do more and more of that if we get more subscribers over there. So check it out. So with that said, let's close this thing out with a piece of music. And I wanted to close it out with a big one for a movie like King Kong. So I think I'm going to go with a song from my most recent album, David Rosen. It's just a self-titled album, and this is the opening track, Creation. This is definitely a big track, so I thought it would be a good fit for King Kong and going big and going huge and gigantic. So, yeah, let's close it out with Creation from my latest album, David Rosen, and we'll be back with more Piecing It Together coming up real soon.
an All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.